I'd now like to invite Joel Orchard to come up and speak with us. Could you please tell us your name and qualifications?
Thank you very much for having me. My name's Joel Orchard. I'm a small-scale farmer from the northern New South Wales region, and I guess part of my work is in advocacy for the young farmers and local food economies.
From your perspective, what are the problems with the current agricultural system and what can be done to address those problems?
I'd probably like to just follow on from what Charlie's been speaking about. I guess a lot of the work that I'm doing is sort of focused around viable alternatives to the industrial food economy. The kind of projects that I've been involved in, I guess, sort of centre around connection, and that's reflective of, I guess, the sort of current state of society and the industrial food model that's really disconnected people from food, it's really disconnected people from landscape, and it's disconnected, especially farmers, from each other. So a lot of the organisational sort of structures that I've tried to support and implement are really about drawing people back together and people to the land. I guess I'd call myself an ecological farmer in which I've embedded myself in a landscape, and the systems that surround local food and food access are these regenerative land management practices. And I think what's really exciting for me, as I've spoken to a lot of young farmers all around the state and the country, is that this is really a pervading culture for the new wave of young farmers. And again, sorry. Future Feeders was an organisation I set up a couple of years ago, really just to try and highlight some of these issues and the barriers for young farmers, and especially to raise a profile of the fact that Australia has an ageing farmer population. In fact, the average age of an Australian farmer is now 60, and we've seen a fairly sharp decline in the number of young people entering into the industry. I guess I've focused on the small-scale farming sector. Some parts of Australia, those statistics are far worse. And probably in the areas where we're still using industrial agriculture and grain farming specifically, the age statistics are not quite so bad. But where we do see, what we do see in those areas is the family farm model is still happening, so farmers are inheriting and succeeding their farms. But for, I guess, the peri-urban community on the east coast of Australia, where I've been focusing my attention, we're seeing a lot of first-generation farmers like myself, and young people who are specifically moving from urban communities and moving onto the land and starting to be food producers for their local community for the first time. So addressing some of these barriers, we've looked at young farmers are finding it hard to get onto land. They're certainly finding it very difficult to access capital. And if you were to reflect on the fact that if you've inherited a family farm, it often comes with machinery, sheds, irrigation, all of the equipment that you need. But if you're going to start a small-scale farm from scratch, you've got an enormous amount of capital that you need to sink into that business. And as we know, high risk with farming and low return on investment, especially in the first couple of years. So I focused my attention on trying to provide a pathway and support program. So we're looking at developing a young farmer incubation hub, which will really basically provide young farmers with everything that they need to get started, access to land, access to shared machinery, access to wash sheds and shared distribution and marketing support. Really, we're trying to provide an opportunity that is fail-safe for young farmers to be able to get into the industry, and so that they're not either broken or disillusioned after the first year and we lose them altogether. The other advantage of working in a system like this is that connection. So it's providing a place where young farmers can start to look at working collaboratively rather than independently, or in the worst case scenario, competitively. We even see, I guess, in the farmers markets community, which is a fantastic first step for providing communities with local food, it's still hyper competitive. So by trying to support a new culture within the farming, small-scale farming sector, we can try and reverse some of these kind of cultural issues that we're seeing with hyper competition and oversupply. The development of that was to bring together young farmers from the region. So the Northern Rivers Young Farmers was the first step. We started to develop just a peer support networks and social networks. Essentially, we just started going to each other's farms and sharing a box of beer and a barbecue. But what we found was that the support that was really able to be provided just through bringing people together. We use a really successful Facebook group just for general communications, things like what's this weed or what's this pest, or you know, who's got this piece of equipment that I can share instead of having to buy my own. We've started to use that network to purchase things in bulk and share the cost and reduce costs of buying fertilisers by the tonnage rather than by the bag, and other sort of pieces of equipment. And now we're starting to develop physical resources and digital resources such as a Young Farmer Toolkit, land sharing templates and lease agreements. We've developed a production and sales directory, and we also use that network to share land opportunities for young farmers who are looking or aspiring to get onto land. And the community is now starting to use that as a pathway to offer pieces of land. The next step for us now is to develop a Young Farmer Leadership Council, which will specifically focus on the small-scale and regenerative farming community. And I guess that's a way of kind of countering where all of the government investment in the development of the agricultural industry is, which is large-scale industrial monoculture farming. Oh, you can skip that one, sorry. Yep, just going through a few of the elements of the Young Farmers Network, and you can continue on. So the growth of that and the success of that young farmer community is really sort of stretched now, and you can see we've clustered around where there's some centres of activity for young farmers, and they've developed their own social media and peer support groups. There's probably a few of those that have got a few more years under the belt and they're more developed than others, but we're getting interest from a range of places throughout Australia to develop their own young farmer communities. And really this is based on a very successful model that's come out of the States that they use called the Greenhorns and the Young Farmers Coalition. So trying to mimic the capacity building of getting young people together. I guess another element to that is the labour pooling. So we're often seeing young farmers trading labour within their own operations. Next. And again. Another element of bringing people together is the idea of a participatory guarantee system, which really works as a locally focused quality assurance system, or an alternative to the organic certification model, which probably most people will be aware has become an almost corporatised model. A PGS offers farmers in bioregions the opportunity to come together and acknowledge and what's the word? Guarantee each other's quality and through a transparency model. So we're focused on the primary motivations for this sort of PGS idea are to reward those local farmers who are making exceptional efforts in their own ecological practice and to deter the prevalence of generic claims and improve the integrity of what's becoming predominant of spray-free and chemical-free farming labels, which basically don't mean anything at all, and provide the consumers with additional confidence and that transparency. They do provide an exceptionally affordable option to farmer recognition rather than a certification model, which has become quite expensive, especially for small-scale farmers. And it creates a collective to improve the communications between locally ecologically minded farmers, and so there's that knowledge and resource sharing. So there's the key features. It's definitely a grassroots alternative, and based on the fact that it's locally focused, it's not a model which is being used for export or for central market distribution, but it definitely supports local communities. We did run a pilot program in the Byron Shire, and we focused on a number of small-scale farms across different sectors, and we're starting to involve the certified organic farms as well. And finally, I guess, is a connection model which brings farmers and consumers together in I guess, a higher level of respect for each other and development, rather than, I guess, what we'd see as a pay and walk away mentality of either your exchange at the supermarket or even your exchange at the farmers markets. Your level of responsibility ends at the financial transaction. Community-supported agriculture is a solidarity economy, and it's developing this level of responsibility that the consumer shares with the farmer. These are systems of transactional trade which increase the quality of life of a region or community rather than bleed it. They consist of activities organised to address and transform exploitation under capitalist economies and large corporations, large shareholder-dominated economies. The CSA movement's growing in Australia, and we've developed a CSA network for Australia and New Zealand, and we've started to map out where those CSAs are. And again, please. There's 4 primary types of CSAs, whether they're driven by the farmer or the consumer, and another number of models which are based more around cooperative ownership. The CSAs can bolster food sovereignty not only by supporting the farmer directly and consistently, but I think they have the ability to stop the commodification mentality and the process which renders farmed products as cheap items to be dismissed because it fails to take into account the health of the farmers and the workers and the land. CSAs strengthen bonds, allow consumers access into the lives and livelihoods and issues that the farmer faces in getting that product to the table. That connection, that information gained by the consumer fans out through their sharing of their experience as a CSA member. And so the CSA community sort of developed in the 1960s, both in the US through the biodynamics community, especially teachings of Rudolf Steiner, and also in Japan, where farmers and consumers were centering around an ethics model that they called Taikei, which is based on a set of 10 principles. I'll probably let you go to the website to read through those, so I don't have to take your time now. And one more. So there's the map. We've found and mapped 32 farms in Australia which identify with the CSA principles, and then globally, the Australia CSA network is a part of Agency, which is the international network of CSA farms, and there's thousands of them in the US and throughout Europe, so it's quite an established model of distribution. And that's just details of where to find more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel.
Thank you, Joel. Does the panel have any questions?
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Please.
Could I ask about would there possibly be a kind of a partnership between this idea and Indigenous people? Because I'm sure Indigenous people would be the last people to get loans from the bank to buy land, you know? So would it be something like a treaty or something like that? Could it be? What would be the relationship and, you know, with the people, the traditional owners of an area?
Sure. I guess from a cultural perspective, definitely recognising that a lot of young farmers have a really heightened sense of responsibility to traditional landowners, and incorporating that awareness and the knowledge into their practice and an alternative level of respect that perhaps we haven't seen in the farming community in the past. In regards to the young farmer movement, I did a study or a survey of the young farmers in New South Wales just in the small-scale farming sector, and there was very, very few respondents that identified as First Nations people. So I think there's a lot of work to do to provide better pathways and access for the Indigenous community to move into that, the sector. And the program that we're looking to develop to support young people into farming, we'll want to invest additional resources to encourage or support Indigenous people into the industry.
Right, thank you.
Joel, thank you. And sorry, Dale, go.
Could you say anything about difficulties you've had, people objecting to or trying to interfere with your work? In the Philippines, they would call you a communist, but I'm not sure about Australia.
Are you asking specifically with the CSA model?
Sorry?
Oh, are you asking with this just one model or some of the other work that they do in sustainable farming?
Well, a number of these projects that you've discussed are brilliant, and it seems to me the idea of the community-supported agriculture could be seen as a threat to larger private interests.
I hope so.
I do too.
Yeah, and so the question, Joel, is what kind of pushback have you or will you or do you get, and how do you handle that?
I think the pushback, especially in Australia, is really just around the fact that it's quite a new model and it's not very well known. And educating the consumer about this risk-sharing model is taking some time. One of the main reasons that we set up that network was really just to raise the profile of the model and its existence in Australia and to try and normalise it rather than it be a radical concept. But I think when you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, asking a consumer to pay for a season's worth of vegetables at the beginning of the season instead of weekly makes a lot of sense, and especially when you're sharing the experience. And a lot of CSA farmers are able to produce gluts of things like tomatoes and zucchinis when the season is good and everybody benefits. And then if somebody gets wiped out by a hailstorm, then there's a general understanding of why there's a little bit less produce 1 week or to the next. I don't think that risk sharing between consumers and producers is a radical or a communist idea. I think it's pretty much it's common sense. It's probably just something we've forgotten.
My only quick question, and as you know, I'm a huge fan of the work that you and others in this space are doing. When I see the map, and a lot of these initiatives are in the slightly more populated areas, and they're particularly around communities that can, you know, the soils and the country, like northern rivers and such. Is there opportunities to take this model out into the open country, some of the places that are truly under phenomenal pressure at the moment from mass land clearing and such? I mean, is this something with smaller populations that could be of a benefit?
Well, I guess a big part of why I'm driving for young farmers and more small-scale agriculture in the Northern Rivers is because I see it as a perfect food bowl for rampant growth of urban populations along the Gold Coast and Brisbane. I guess all small-scale farming communities have to exist around large urban populations for a consumer base. I guess I hope to see in the Northern Rivers a predominance and a focus on ecological farming methods so that we can make that a common feature across the region, and then that can attract investment into education and other ways for people to engage. There are a few CSAs specifically that exist outside of the immediate urban fringe, but generally they still need an urban population to support that business model. And we do see farmers markets tend to be able to offer a lot of the services to smaller communities that CSAs don't necessarily need to cater for. So I think it's just an extension of the farmers markets and an alternative way to access food. But I think the most important thing to recall is that the CSA offers that risk sharing, whereas the farmers markets doesn't generally.
No, thank you, Joel. Thanks a lot.